Here is a long-form, deeply detailed monologue adapted for the daily gossip podcast, tailored for a mature, geopolitically aware audience in Europe and the Americas. Welcome back to Daily Gossip, your premier destination for the stories behind the headlines, the whispers in the corridors of power, and the unvarnished truth about the figures who shape our world. I'm your host, and today we need to have a serious conversation. Grab your coffee, whether you're tuning in from a cafe in Paris, navigating the morning commute in London, or winding down in New York or Los Angeles. We usually dive into the social mechanics of the elite, but today the biggest piece of gossip, the most alarming unraveling of a public figure, is happening right in the Oval Office. We need to talk about the illusion of the strongman. For years, Donald Trump has cultivated a brand built entirely on the aesthetics of dominance. It's a reality television version of power. Loud, brash, unapologetic, and constantly aggressive. But what happens when that facade meets actual lethal geopolitical pushback? What happens when the bluster is called out by regimes that do not care about poll numbers or truth social posts? Well, my friends, the mask slips. And over the past 48 hours, we have witnessed a masterclass in capitulation. Donald Trump has, for all intents and purposes, been scared into submission by Iran. Let's set the stage and look at the absolute disaster of a press conference that just unfolded. We are looking at a geopolitical crisis that has serious implications for all of us, particularly those of you listening in Europe who rely on global stability and NATO for your security. Recently, tensions reached a boiling point. The United States engaged in military strikes, and Iran, operating under a leadership that has carefully studied the current American administration, decided to punch back. And they didn't just throw a symbolic punch. They launched a retaliatory drone strike that hit a commercial airport in Kuwait, alongside a United States military airbase situated right next door. We are also talking about strikes threatening United States military assets in Bahrain. The footage coming out of Kuwait is staggering. You look at this international airport, a symbol of global connection, and 24 hours after it was supposed to be operating normally, you see sheer devastation. Now, historically, when an American president faces an attack on U.S. assets and allied infrastructure, the response is calculated, resolute, and unified. But when the press cornered Donald Trump to ask him about this blatant act of aggression, his response was so bewildering, so entirely subservient, that it sent shockwaves through diplomatic channels from Brussels to Tokyo. Instead of projecting strength, Donald Trump seemed to actively praise and justify Iran's retaliation. When a reporter asked him if the ceasefire with Iran was still on after the attacks on Kuwait, Trump rambled into a defense of the regime that just bombed his own military in Abbas's backyard. Listen to the phrasing he used. He stood there and essentially said, and quote, well, there's a reason for everything, and quote, he admitted that the U.S. had hit them hard the night before, and then, in a moment of stunning geopolitical surrender, he rationalized the attack by saying, and quote, so there is a reason for certain things. Some people would say they were slightly provoked because we took strong action for a different reason. So they were reciprocating influence. And quote, reciprocating influence. Let that sink in. A hostile foreign power bombs an airport and a military base housing American personnel, and the commander-in-chief brushes it off as, in quote, not a big deal, end quote, dismissing it as mere, end quote, reciprocation, end quote. He even used the bizarre, malapropism-laced phrase, end quote, we nipped it in the butt very quickly, end quote. It was a staggering display of weakness. He effectively told the global community that if you hit the United States hard enough, the president will not only back down, but he will go on national television and make excuses for you. Iran is watching this, and they are seeing this response for exactly the weakness that it is. But to truly understand this, we have to look at the psychological pattern. This isn't an isolated incident. If you cast your minds back about a year or so, we saw the exact same psychological folding happen with the Houthis in Yemen. The Houthis, who are widely recognized as heavily armed proxies of the Iranian regime, were actively disrupting global trade and firing upon ships. And what did Donald Trump do when faced with their aggression? He praised them. He stood before the cameras and called them, end quote, brave, end quote, and, end quote, courageous, end quote. He marveled at their ability to withstand punishment, saying, end quote, I think the Houthis are among the toughest people out there, end quote. He spoke about them with a strange sense of reverence, treating a militant group that was actively attacking international interests as if they were a tough opponent in a real estate negotiation that he secretly admired. What this demonstrates over and over again is a terrifying reality for global security. When you assert yourself, when you use actual force and stand up to Donald Trump, he folds. He submits, and he submits with dizzying speed. He should never have pursued this chaotic, escalating, and frankly unlawful shadow war in the first place. Every single day he compounds the problem. It is a surreal sight to behold. On a Monday, he will make incendiary social media posts threatening to wipe out the Iranian civilization, promising fire and fury like the world has never seen. But the moment Iran actually punches back, the moment the threat becomes real, Donald Trump quite literally curls into a psychological ball. He is scared to death of actual conflict, preferring the safety of his keyboard to the reality of the Situation Room. And the Iranian leadership knows this. They have learned the lesson that the Houthis taught the world. Let's look at exactly how the Iranian regime played this. You have their foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, going on Iranian state television, looking directly into the camera, and stating unequivocally that any attack on Beirut will have serious consequences and lead to the full resumption of war. You have the Iranian parliament leader, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, declaring that the era of threatening Iran without cost has come to an end, warning that any aggression will be met with a, regret-inducing response, and then you have high-level national security figures in their parliament openly mocking Trump and Abbas' advisors on social media. In response to all this coordinated, muscular posturing from Tehran, what does Iran do? They post a meme. They literally post a social media video mocking the United States, showing the U.S. being figuratively destroyed by the BRICS nations Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Iran is essentially saying, if you and Abbas are going to try to govern via memes and social media bluster, we will beat you at your own game. And Trump let them. To understand why this is happening, we have to take a hard look at the man himself. During this same disastrous press conference, the physical and mental state of the president was impossible to ignore. For a man obsessed with projecting alpha male vitality, he looked entirely defeated. As he sat in the Oval Office, he appeared lethargic, sickly, and thoroughly exhausted by the weight of the office he holds. And, as is always the case with figures like this, when they feel small on the world stage, they try to make others feel small in the room to compensate. This brings us to his deeply uncomfortable and frankly bizarre interactions with the press during that session. Instead of addressing the burning crises in the Middle East, he zeroed in on a female reporter. In a moment dripping with deeply ingrained misogyny, he began attacking her simply for not smiling. He stood at the podium and complained, she never smiles. We see a young, beautiful woman never smiles. I never see a smile off her face. I see her standing there with hatred in her eyes. He accused her of harboring hatred simply because she was doing her job, asking serious questions in a serious setting. It was a pathetic attempt to assert dominance over a woman in the room because he couldn't and Abbas to assert dominance over a regime across the globe. And if you thought that was strange, what followed was genuinely alarming. In a bizarre power play, he began deliberately dropping his pens on the floor, forcing his advisor, Peter Navarro, to scramble and pick them up for him. It was a weird, theatrical display of subservience. A petty tyrant demanding his courtiers bow to him to soothe his bruised ego. When cornered, Donald Trump always retreats to his safe space. His obsession with crowd sizes and his own perceived grandeur. In the middle of a press conference dealing with international military strikes, he pivoted to the most absurd, self-aggrandizing tangent imaginable. He started talking about the ramps built for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He then transitioned into a rambling monologue about the Lincoln Memorial Reflecting Pool. He obsessed over its construction, noting it was built in 1922 out of granite, complaining that it's only 1.5 feet deep. Why was he talking about a reflecting pool? Because he needed to pivot back to his favorite grievance. The crowd size at his July 4th event compared to Martin Luther King Jr.'s historic "I have a dream" speech. While the Middle East was quite literally burning, the President of the United States was standing at a podium arguing that he had the exact same crowd size and maybe a little bit more, than MLK. He complained that the media gave MLK 1 million people but only gave him 25,000. He claimed he had pictures to prove his crowds were identical, despite a 70-year difference. He then inexplicably held up a printed sign, a physical prop, trying to argue that if the Lincoln reflecting pool were a building, it would be taller than certain skyscrapers. It was a moment of profound detachment from reality. We are watching a global leader obsess over the imaginary height of a shallow pool and crowd sizes from years ago, while adversarial drones are striking commercial airports. It is a level of vanity that borders on the clinical. Of course, no Trump meltdown is complete without a visceral attack on the domestic press and his political rivals. When Caitlin Collins from CNN respectfully asked a clarifying question about the Department of Justice and Oppo's $1.8 billion fund, he completely lost his composure. He didn't in Oppo's know the answer, admitting he and Oppo's have to, ask the lawyers, but he immediately used the term, weaponization fund, to launch into a vicious tirade. He called CNN and the New York Times fake news, claiming they have, abused our people so badly, He pointed directly at Collins, telling her to, be quiet, and said she should be ashamed of herself. He called CNN and Oppo's reporting, garbage, that is impossible to straighten out. He then devolved into schoolyard insults, calling his political opposition, dumbbrats, a childish play on Democrats. This overwhelming need to attack domestic critics is inextricably linked to his deep-seated insecurities regarding his predecessor. This brings us to his ultimate ghost, Barack Obama. During the same press conference, out of nowhere, he launched into a furious denunciation of the Iran nuclear deal. He called the deal penned by, Barack Hussein Obama, making sure to emphasize the middle name in that classic dog whistle fashion, one of the dumbest deals I and Oppo's ever seen, He repeated the tired, misleading talking points about $1.7 billion in cash being flown to Iran in a Boeing 757 with the seats taken out. He desperately needed to reframe the current disaster, a disaster of his own making, by pointing the finger at a deal he tore up years ago. He claimed his current chaotic lack of strategy is, the exact opposite, of the Obama era. And he and Oppo's right about that, but not in the way he thinks. The Obama-era deal, however flawed one might argue it was, kept Iran and Oppo's nuclear ambitions in a verifiable box. Trump and Oppo's exact opposite, approach has led to a Middle East on fire, an emboldened Iran, and a United States president making excuses for attacks on his own military bases. Now, why does all of this matter so deeply to our listeners across Europe and the Americas? Why ISN and Oppo's? This just another chaotic day in Washington. Because the world is watching, and authoritarian regimes are taking notes. Geopolitical analysts, particularly those embedded in the Middle East like the respected commentator Aziz, have been breaking down exactly how this is being perceived in Tehran. The interpretation in the halls of Iranian power is crystal clear. Donald Trump only responds to power. Their view is that the more Iran stands firm, the more they demonstrate a willingness to escalate, the greater the chances that Trump will back down. And the evidence supports this theory entirely. When Iran threatened to target Israel if Israel struck Beirut, what happened? Trump immediately called Prime Minister Netanyahu and urged restraint. When Iran targeted U.S. bases in the Persian Gulf in retaliation for U.S. strikes, what did Trump do? He adopted a remarkably softer tone toward the Iranian leadership. He even gave an incredibly bizarre interview to the New York Post where he spoke about the Ayatollah with a strange affection. When asked who was making the decisions in Iran, Trump nonchalantly said, we seem to be getting along quite well. When asked if he and Oppo's like to meet the Ayatollah, he eagerly replied, yeah, I and Oppo's like to meet him. We probably will meet at some point depending on how it all works out. He sounds like a fan hoping for a backstage pass, not the leader of the free world dealing with a hostile state. Meanwhile, to keep up the charade of diplomacy, we see these cyclical, almost meaningless ceasefires announced between Israel, Lebanon, and Hezbollah, one in April, one in May, and another one just hours ago. It's a geopolitical revolving door that solves nothing but gives the illusion of action. But the most chilling consequence of this perceived weakness is the ripple effect it has across the globe. Lots of authoritarians are seeing the weakness that Trump is exhibiting. They see that you can walk all over him, and he will inevitably back down. Just look at Vladimir Putin. Putin has been actively threatening a nuclear triad with Belarus, blatantly attempting to intimidate the United States and Ukraine. While President Zelensky stands firm, refusing to be intimidated by the barrage of ballistic, hypersonic, and drone strikes raining down on Kyiv night after night, the American president is projecting absolute subservience. Look at North Korea. Kim Jong-un is openly mocking Western deterrence. He is posting photos of himself standing proudly next to nuclear warheads. He is announcing grand plans to expand North Korea and OPPO's nuclear force exponentially, conducting highly publicized inspections of nuclear production facilities. These dictators are pushing the boundaries, testing the fences because they know the guard dog is asleep, or worse, terrified. And here is where the story hits closest to home for our European audience. What does Donald Trump do when faced with this unified front of authoritarian aggression? Does he rally his allies? Does he fortify the alliances that have kept the Western world safe since World War II? No. According to explosive reports from Reuters, citing sources speaking under the condition of anonymity, Donald Trump is now officially moving to cut the military capabilities the United States contributes to NATO's standing forces. Let that sink in. At a time when Putin is rattling the nuclear saber in Europe, at a time when Iran is bombing commercial airports, Donald Trump has decided to officially reduce American commitments to NATO. Reports indicate he is pulling fighter jets, vital refueling tankers, naval assets, and advanced drones away from the European theater. The United States government has reportedly told their European counterparts that they need to bolster these capabilities themselves. This chilling message was delivered by the top U.S. commander in Europe, Air Force General Alexis Grinkwich. While the exact timeline of these reductions is not yet clear, NATO nations have been put on notice. It is the ultimate tragic irony. When a hostile foreign power like Iran bombs an airport near a U.S. base, Donald Trump praises them, makes excuses for them, and talks about how much he wants to meet their supreme leader. But when it comes to the NATO alliance, the historic democratic partnership that forms the bedrock of European and American security, he treats them as an enemy to be punished and abandoned. He praises the attackers and he attacks the allies. This ISN and OPPO's just political gossip, folks. This is the unraveling of the global world order broadcast live from a press conference podium. We are witnessing a man who is entirely consumed by his own ego, terrified of actual confrontation with dictators, and perfectly willing to sacrifice international alliances to save face. Whether you are deeply invested in the nuances of Middle Eastern policy, or you simply want to know that the NATO umbrella protecting Europe remains intact, these developments should chill you to the bone. The facade has crumbled. The strongman is scared, and the rest of us are left to navigate the dangerous, unpredictable world he is leaving in his wake. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive on Daily Gossip. If you appreciate this kind of unvarnished, detailed analysis of the forces shaping our world, please make sure you hit that subscribe button. We are on the road to building a massive community of informed, engaged listeners, and we'd love for you to be a part of it. Your support helps independent media thrive and allows us to keep bringing you the stories that matter most. Consider becoming a paid member of our channel to unlock exclusive content and support the journalism we do here. Stay safe, stay informed, and I'll see you next time on Daily Gossip.